There is a place in England where time does not bend to the wishes of men with clipboards, where the grass has been cut the same way since 1348, where the boots hit the cobblestones at a rhythm so precise that the stones themselves seem to anticipate the next step, where the flags know which direction to face before the wind even decides, where a horse, if he has lived long enough and paid close enough attention, can tell you exactly what is going to go wrong today simply by watching which human walked in carrying a laminated piece of paper. My name is Monty. I am 17 years old, which in horse years means I have outlived 3 coordinators, 2 restructuring committees, and 1 very ambitious attempt to modernize the Garter Day program in 2019 that ended with a baron standing in a fountain. I'm retired now, which means I watch from the east stable yard while the younger horses do the ceremonial work. I have earned this. I have stepped in formation through 11 Garter Days, 4 royal birthdays, and 1 state visit where the weather was so bad that my rider's hat flew off and landed on a French diplomat. I tell you all of this so you understand that when I say I knew this particular Garter Day was going to be extraordinary, before it even started, I'm not being dramatic. I'm being a horse who has seen things. The morning began the way all great Garter Days begin, cold, precise, and slightly damp in a way that the British consider character building. The grounds crew had been on site since 4 in the morning. The barriers were up. The route markers were chalked. The band had done their sound check in the lower ward and sounded, as they always do, like something that makes foreign dignitaries go very quiet and place a hand over their heart without quite knowing why. The chairs for the invited guests were arranged in 3 rows along the procession path, each one placed with the kind of care that suggests the person doing the placing understood that this is not a garden party. This is history arranged into chairs. And at 6:47 in the morning, standing at the corner of the Henry VIII gateway with a cup of tea going cold in his left hand and his eyes already doing a slow sweep of the route, was James Hartwell. 14 years, that is how long James had been doing this, not 14 years of showing up and going through the motions. 14 years of understanding that the motions are the point, that the precision is not decoration, that every second of timing in a ceremony like this is load-bearing. The way a stone in an arch is load-bearing. Remove one, and the whole thing shifts. He was not a large man, he was not a loud man. He had dark eyes that moved slowly and missed nothing, and a jaw that appeared to have been carved specifically for the purpose of not reacting to things that lesser jaws would react to. He had done this ceremony 11 times. He had stood in rain, in wind, in the kind of English summer heat that arrives for 40 minutes in June, and then apologizes by leaving. He had managed crowds, redirected confused tourists, guided dignitaries who had forgotten which entrance they were supposed to use, and once, in 2021, quietly intercepted a corgi who had somehow gotten past 3 separate checkpoints and was attempting to join the procession. James had seen everything, which is exactly why, at 6:51 in the morning, when he saw the man in the grey suit walking across the lower ward with a clipboard, a laminated badge, and the specific stride of someone who had recently been given a title they did not fully understand, James set down his tea, straightened his uniform, and said nothing at all. Because James had also learned that the worst things always announce themselves first. His name was Derek Foss, Assistant Events Coordinator, Office of Ceremonial Affairs, temporarily assigned to Windsor Castle for the duration of the Garter Day proceedings. His badge said all of this, his clipboard confirmed it. His expression suggested he had read both several times that morning and found them deeply satisfying. Derek was 43 years old, had worked in event logistics for 11 years, and had attended exactly 1 previous royal ceremony, which was a garden reception where his primary responsibility had been confirming dietary requirements for the canapé selection. He had done this competently. He had been promoted, and somewhere between the dietary requirements and the laminated schedule he was now carrying, Derek had developed a theory. The theory was this: tradition, while charming, was inefficient. The Garter Day procession, in Derek's professional assessment, ran approximately 17 minutes longer than it needed to. The gathering time in St. George's Hall could be compressed. The movement from the state apartments to the Garter throne room could be overlapped with the band's positioning rather than sequenced after it. And the guard detail at the sovereign's entrance which had been arriving and taking position at precisely the same time for the past 60 years could. Derek had decided move 15 minutes earlier, which would create what he described in his notes as operational breathing room. Derek had written all of this in a memo. The memo had not been approved. Derek had brought it anyway. He walked across the lower ward at 6:51 in the morning with his clipboard and his laminated badge and his unapproved memo, and he stopped in front of the first member of the grounds crew he found and said, with the confidence of a man who has never been told no by a stone wall, "I need to talk to someone about the timing from the East Stable Yard. I watched him arrive." I had seen this before. Not Derek specifically, but the type. The clipboard, the badge, the stride, the particular energy of a man who has decided that he understands something better than the people who have been doing it since before he was born. I ate some hay. This was going to take a while. James became aware of Derek's specific mission at approximately 7:15, when one of the younger guards came to find him near the Sovereign's entrance with an expression that said something has happened. But I am not sure if I am allowed to be annoyed about it yet. There's a coordinator, the younger guard said. His name was Tom, 22 years old, 7 months into his ceremonial posting. Good instincts. Still learning that the instincts were correct, he's been talking to the band. Talking to them about what? James said. It was not quite a question. It was the kind of sentence that already knows the answer and is simply waiting for confirmation. Timing, Tom said. He wants them to move their positioning earlier. He says it'll create breathing room. James looked at the route. He looked at the barriers. He looked at the chairs, which were correctly placed. He looked at the gate, which was correctly positioned. He looked at the sky, which was doing what English June skies do, which is threaten without committing. Where is he now? James said. He went toward the North Terrace, Tom said. He had a laminated schedule. Of course he did, James said. He did not run. James Hartwell did not run toward problems. He walked toward them with the steady, unhurried pace of a man who has learned that problems do not get smaller when you rush at them. They get startled and make more problems. You walk toward them, you arrive, you deal with them. He found Derek on the North Terrace, speaking to the barrier's supervisor with the tone of a man, explaining something simple to someone he suspects might not be simple enough to understand it. The issue, Derek was saying, holding the clipboard at an angle that was clearly meant to communicate authority, is that the current timing creates a 17-minute overlap that we simply don't need. If we move the initial positioning earlier, Mr. Foss, James said. Derek turned. He looked at James. He took in the uniform, the posture, the expression, and made the first of what would be many errors of the day, which was deciding that James was a problem he could manage. "Ah," Derek said. "You're with the guard detail. I am the guard detail," James said. Derek nodded in a way that suggested he was recalibrating, but not retreating. He checked his watch. It was 7:18. "Good. I was actually going to come find you. I've been doing a review of the day's timing and I think there are some efficiencies we can." "The timing," James said, "has not changed." Derek blinked. "I understand that, but if you look at the schedule," he lifted the clipboard, "you can see that by moving the initial positioning to 8:15 instead of 8:30, we create, James said, "a guard detail standing at an empty gate for 15 minutes while the procession is not ready to move, which creates a crowd that thinks the procession has started, which creates a surge at the barriers, which creates a safety incident." Derek opened his mouth. James waited. Derek closed his mouth. "The timing," James said again, with exactly the same inflection as the first time, because when something is true, it does not need to be said differently, only repeated has not changed. Derek checked his watch, 7:19. He wrote something on his clipboard. He walked away from the East Stable Yard. I heard none of this directly, but I could read the walk. Derek's stride when he came back around the corner toward the lower ward had the specific quality of a man who has decided that he has not lost an argument, he has simply been temporarily redirected. I ate more hay. The day was just beginning. By 8 o'clock, the consequences of Derek's morning conversations had begun to arrive. The way consequences always arrive, which is not all at once but in a steady, polite, increasingly irritating sequence. The band, having been told by Derek that their positioning time had moved, had split into two factions. Half of them had moved to their new position at 7:50. The other half, having been told by their conductor that no such change had been authorized, were in their original position. The result was a band that occupied two locations simultaneously, which is impressive in a physics sense and catastrophic in a ceremonial sense. Tom was dispatched to resolve it. He did efficiently by finding the conductor and confirming that the original schedule stood, which resulted in a very cold and slightly embarrassed half-band walking back across the lower ward at 8:05, while tourists photographed them with the cheerful curiosity of people who assume that everything they see at Windsor Castle is intentional. At 8:12, a senior dignitary from the diplomatic delegation, having been handed a revised route card by Derek at some point during the morning, arrived at the wrong courtyard entrance. He stood there for approximately 90 seconds with the patient expression of a man who has attended enough official events to know that sometimes you simply wait and the correct person will come and find you. James found him. James walked him at an unhurried pace to the correct entrance. The dignitary said thank you. James nodded. Nothing further was said. This was a conversation conducted entirely in the language of people who understand that the less said about a mistake, the faster it stops being one. At 8:17, a section of crowd barriers on the east side of the route were found to be positioned 18 inches further into the path than the chalk markers indicated. The barrier's supervisor, having spoken with Derek that morning, had made the adjustment based on Derek's assessment that the original placement was too conservative. The adjustment meant that the procession path was narrower by 18 inches on one side. 18 inches does not sound like much. But when you are moving a procession that includes individuals in full ceremonial robes that have a combined width that was calculated against the original barrier placement, 18 inches is the difference between dignified and unfortunate. The barriers were moved back. The chalk marks, it turned out, had known what they were doing. James corrected each of these without announcement, without visible frustration, and without once saying Derek's name aloud in a sentence that also contained the word problem. He simply moved through the morning like a man who has accepted that his job today has two components, the ceremony and Derek, and that both require the same response, which is patience applied with absolute consistency. Derek, for his part, continued checking his watch. 7:51, 8:03, 8:19, 8:26. Each time he checked it, something nearby went slightly sideways. I'm not saying there was a causal relationship. I am a retired horse, not a scientist. I'm simply noting the pattern. The confrontation, when it came at the Sovereign's entrance at 8:34. This was always where it was going to come. The Sovereign's entrance is not simply a gate. It is the gate, the point through which the procession flows, the location that anchors the entire sequence of the day. And it was here, at 8:34, that Derek arrived with his clipboard and his laminated badge and the expression of a man who has been recalculating since 7:19 and has decided he was right the first time. James was already at his position. He had been there since 8:29, which is exactly when he was supposed to be there, which is exactly 1 minute earlier than the formal requirement, because James operated on the principle that being precisely on time means arriving slightly before it. Derek stopped in front of him. He checked his watch, 8:34. The procession moves at 9:15. Derek said, "If the guard detail is in position now, that's 41 minutes of static standing. That serves no operational purpose." James looked at the gate. He looked at the route. He looked at the crowd, which was already 6 deep along the barriers. Cameras raised, children on shoulders, a man in the third row holding a small Union Jack with the focused expression of someone who has been waiting for this for a long time. He looked at Derek. He said nothing. Derek held up the clipboard. "I have a schedule that was prepared by the Office of Ceremonial Affairs that indicates." "That schedule," James said in the quiet, even tone of a man who has made a decision and does not require agreement to proceed with it, "was not approved." Derek's jaw moved. "I prepared it based on it was not approved," James said again. Same words, same tone. Same absolute absence of anger. Because anger would have suggested the outcome was uncertain, and James had no uncertainty about the outcome. "I have been assigned to this ceremony," Derek said, and now there was an edge in his voice. the specific edge of a man whose authority has been questioned enough times in one morning that he has started to feel it personally by the Office of Ceremonial Affairs, and my responsibility is to ensure that. Your responsibility, James said. And this is the moment that the people standing nearest the gate would later describe to their friends and family in the specific way that people describe moments they know they witnessed something that mattered, is to ensure the ceremony runs correctly. The ceremony runs correctly when it runs on time. It runs on time when it runs on schedule. The schedule has not changed. My position has not changed. This gate will be held at this time by this detail. That is what happens today. He did not raise his voice. He did not step forward. He did not reach for anything or gesture at anything or look at anyone other than Derek. He simply said it the way you state a fact about geography or mathematics, with the complete calm of something that was true before anyone arrived and will be true after everyone leaves. Derek checked his watch, 8:36. He wrote something on his clipboard. He checked his watch again, 8:37. Then again, 8:37 and a half. A woman standing at the barrier 3 feet away leaned over to her husband and whispered something. Her husband nodded without taking his eyes off James. A child near the front asked his father why the guard wasn't moving. His father said quietly, "That was rather the point." Derek stood there for another 40 seconds. Then he walked away, not defeated, exactly. That is not quite the right word. Derek walked away the way a weather system walks away, still present somewhere, still carrying moisture, but no longer directly overhead. Tom appeared at James's left shoulder approximately 20 seconds later. "He's going toward the North Terrace again," Tom said. "He'll come back," James said. "Should I?" "No," James said. "Hold your position." Tom held his position. At 9:02, something happened that no clipboard had anticipated and no memo could have managed. A tourist, a man in his mid-50s wearing a waterproof jacket in a shade of yellow that suggested he had purchased it for a hiking trip and simply never stopped wearing it, stepped over the barrier on the east side of the route. Not aggressively, not with any apparent intention to cause disruption. He stepped over it with the specific distracted confidence of a man who has been standing in one place for 40 minutes and has decided, without quite deciding it consciously, that a slightly better angle exists on the other side of the rope. He had his camera raised before his second foot was over. Tom was moving before the man's second foot landed. "Sir," Tom said, arriving with the quiet speed of someone who has been trained to cover distance without looking like he's covering distance, "I need you to step back behind the barrier." The man lowered his camera. He looked at Tom. He looked at the barrier. He looked at his own feet, which were clearly on the wrong side of it, and had the expression of a person who has only just understood something that was obvious to everyone else. "Oh," he said, "right, sorry." He stepped back over. He adjusted his camera. He found a slightly different angle from behind the barrier and appeared entirely satisfied with it. The whole exchange lasted 11 seconds. Derek, who had returned to the east side of the route at 9:01 and witnessed the entire thing from approximately 20 feet away, immediately wrote something on his clipboard. He walked over to Tom. "That man was across the barrier," Derek said. "Yes," Tom said. "He's back behind it. There should be a secondary barrier," Derek said. "I've been saying since this morning that the barrier placement is 2. The barriers," Tom said, with a patience that he had clearly learned from watching James operate all morning, "are in the correct position." Derek checked his watch, 9:03. He wrote something on his clipboard. He checked his watch again. 3 minutes later, a pigeon landed on Derek's clipboard. He flinched. The pigeon regarded him with the complete indifference that pigeons reserve specifically for people who are taking themselves too seriously. Then it left. From the east stable yard, I observed this with great satisfaction. At 9:15, the procession began. It began the way it always begins. Not with a signal that the crowd can see, not with an announcement, not with a countdown that Derek could have tracked on his laminated schedule. It began because it was time. Because the accumulated precision of hundreds of decisions made correctly over weeks of preparation had arrived at the exact moment they were designed to arrive at, and the thing simply began the way a river begins, not at any one point, but as the result of everything upstream having been exactly what it needed to be. The band played. The crowd, 6 deep along the barriers, went quiet in the specific way that crowds go quiet when they understand that something real is happening in front of them. Not a performance, not a show. Something that has been happening for longer than anyone present has been alive and will continue happening long after today's participants are gone. The Knights of the Garter moved in procession. The robes caught the morning light. The plumes moved with the slight wind that had arrived courteously at 9:14 and would presumably leave the moment it was no longer needed. The boots met the cobblestones at exactly the rhythm that the cobblestones were expecting. James stood at the sovereign's entrance and did not move. He did not check a watch. He did not consult a schedule. He did not write anything on anything. He stood in the position he had been trained to stand in, at the time he had been trained to stand there, and he held the gate the way the gate had always been held, and the procession flowed through it the way the procession had always flowed. It lasted 31 minutes. Every second of it was correct. Derek Foss missed 11 of those 31 minutes. This is not something that was done to him by James, or by Tom, or by anyone in the guard detail. It was done to him by the morning he had created. At 9:09, 6 minutes before the procession began, a member of the events team had found Derek near the North Terrace and informed him, with genuine regret, that the position Derek had been standing in since 8:54 was actually inside the cleared zone for the procession path. Derek's revised routing, the one he had sketched onto his clipboard that morning based on his adjusted timing, had placed him in a corridor that was now under the original schedule that had proceeded without his adjustments, designated as part of the processional route. He was asked to move. He was moved to a position behind the secondary barrier on the west side of the lower ward, which is a perfectly adequate position for watching the Garter Day procession if you are a member of the public. It is not, however, the position that the Assistant Events Coordinator from the Office of Ceremonial Affairs had envisioned for himself when he arrived that morning with his clipboard and his laminated badge and his theory about breathing room. A tourist standing next to Derek had a small folding step stool and offered Derek a turn on it so he could see over the crowd. Derek declined. The tourist used the step stool and got an excellent view. Derek checked his watch at 9:11, 9:14, 9:17, 9:22, and 9:29. Each time he recorded something on his clipboard. Whatever he was recording, it did not appear to be making him feel better. At 9:26, a small child standing at the barrier directly in front of Derek turned around and offered him a piece of his biscuit, because children at these ages have not yet learned to distinguish between people who need comforting and people who need a different kind of lesson entirely. Derek took the biscuit. It was apparently a ginger snap. He ate it. I choose to believe this was the best moment of his day. After the procession had passed, after the crowd had exhaled and begun the slow, happy dispersal of people who have witnessed something worth witnessing, James returned to his post near the sovereign's entrance and began the post-ceremony protocol, checking the route, confirming positions. The systematic, unhurried work of a man for whom the ceremony ending is simply the beginning of the next set of responsibilities. Tom arrived beside him. "Smooth," Tom said. "It was correct," James said, which was for James the highest available praise. They stood for a moment. The lower ward was clearing slowly. The band had moved to their dispersal position. The chairs were being collected by the grounds crew with the same careful attention that had placed them. "The barrier's supervisor wants to know if you need anything adjusted for the stand down," Tom said. "Tell him to go by the chalk marks," James said. "Right," Tom said. There was a pause. "The coordinator," Tom said, with the careful tone of someone approaching a subject sideways, "apparently has submitted a report." James looked at the gate. He submitted a report saying that several of his recommended adjustments were not implemented and that this created unnecessary operational friction. James nodded slowly. "Should I?" "No," James said. "He's going to say that the timing could have been." "Tom," James said. Tom stopped. "The ceremony ran correctly," James said. "Every element was in position. Every second was as it was planned. The procession began when it was supposed to begin, moved as it was supposed to move, and ended as it was supposed to end. No one was hurt. No barrier was in the wrong place. No dignitary stood in the wrong courtyard for more than 90 seconds. A pause. That is what happened today. That is what the record will show. What the report says is not the record." Tom absorbed this. "Right," he said. "Go check the east barriers," James said. Tom went to check the east barriers. Derek Foss left Windsor Castle at 11:47 that morning. He left with his clipboard, his laminated badge, his approved by no one memo, and the remains of a ginger snap biscuit in his jacket pocket. He had submitted his report, he had CC'd 3 people, he had used the words suboptimal 4 times and operational breathing room twice. He had also, without quite being aware of it, spent an entire Garter day at Windsor Castle and seen something extraordinary. The procession, the robes, the light, the crowd going quiet, the boots on the cobblestones. He had been positioned badly for 11 minutes of it, and he had spent much of the rest of it looking at a clipboard, but he had been there. And whatever he wrote in his report, whatever he chose to make of the morning, that part was his. The ceremony did not care about his report. It did not care about his memo, his badge, his watch, his 17-minute efficiency finding, or his theory about breathing room. It had been happening for 676 years. It would continue happening. It had absorbed far worse than a man with a clipboard. It had absorbed the Black Death, 2 world wars, and 1 corgi. A slightly revised timing proposal from the Office of Ceremonial Affairs was not going to be the thing that stopped it. The chalk marks would be washed away by morning. And next Garter Day, someone would come out at 4 in the morning and draw them again, in exactly the same place, because that is where they go, and everyone who needs to know that already knows it. From the East Stable Yard, I watched the last of the crowd move through the lower ward and out through the gates. A boy near the back was still holding his small Union Jack. He hadn't lowered it once since the procession passed. His mother was trying to get him to fold it up. He was resisting with the cheerful, total stubbornness of a child who has decided this is a flag-holding day and the flag holding is not yet complete. I understood this. Some things deserve to be held a little longer than strictly necessary. James walked past the stable yard at 12:04. He did not look in. He was carrying his hat in one hand and reading something on a piece of paper with the other, and his face had the settled, quiet expression of a man who has done what he came to do and is already thinking about what comes next. He had not raised his voice once. He had not moved from his position once when moving would have been wrong. He had not explained himself more than was necessary. He had not checked a watch. He had simply known what time it was, in the way that people who understand something deeply always know what time it is, which is not by looking at a clock, but by feeling where they are in the shape of the thing they are part of. The ceremony had run correctly. That was enough. That was, in fact, everything. I have seen many Garter days. I have seen rain come in sideways off the long walk and hit the procession at the worst possible moment and not stop a single step. I have seen dignitaries who were clearly unwell hold their position with a grace that made watching them an act of respect. I have seen crowds of 30,000 people go completely, voluntarily silent because what they were watching asked it of them, and they understood the ask. I have seen my own kind, horses far younger and less experienced than I was, hold their composure in conditions that would test a statue. I have never, in 17 years of observation from this stable yard and 11 years of ceremonial service before that, seen a ceremony stopped by a man with a clipboard. Not because the men with clipboards are not sincere. Derek Foss was sincere. He believed in his efficiency assessment. He believed the 17 minutes were recoverable. He was not a bad man. He was a man who had confused his tools for his understanding, which is a very human thing to do and a very easy mistake to make when the tool is shiny and laminated and says your name on it. The mistake is thinking that because you can measure something, you understand it. The ceremony at Windsor Castle is not 17 minutes of inefficiency. It is 676 years of accumulated meaning, expressed in 31 minutes of boots and robes and silence and flags. You cannot compress it, you cannot breathe room it, you cannot make it more efficient. Efficiency is not the point. The point is the point, and the point has been the same point for longer than anyone's clipboard can contain. James Hartwell understood this. He had understood it, I suspect, since approximately his 3rd Garter Day, when he stopped watching the ceremony and started being part of it. That is the difference. That is always the difference. The ones who watch it think it can be improved. The ones who are part of it know it only needs to be protected. Next year, when June comes again and the chalk marks go back down on the cobblestones, James will be there. He will arrive slightly before he is required to. He will stand exactly where he is supposed to stand. He will hold the gate. and the ceremony will flow through it the way it always has, because that is what ceremonies do when the people responsible for them understand that their job is not to improve the thing. Their job is to show up, trust the process, and hold the line. The rest takes care of itself. It always has.